this over with me. A bit of furniture moving. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all really well. No? All right, that's all right. That's fine. It's fine. You don't have to be. It's cold, dark January mornings, but I hope you're really well. Let's put it that much. So this morning we are continuing our series in the book, or book, depending on, as Matt reminded us, of 1 and 2 Samuel, which as we started a couple of weeks ago, and we're sort of looking. We're going to work through this sort of one book split into two over the next few weeks, and hopefully, if you're on the mailing list and you've been reading your emails, or you were listening in the last couple of weeks, you'll know that we're sort of taking quite big chunks each week, and there's a reading plan that Matt has circulated if you're able to sort of read along in preparation. Maybe you've had an opportunity to do that, and we have encouraged folk who can to bring Bibles with them on Sunday mornings, because we're going to dot around a bit. Now, you might have forgotten that this morning, or you might not have it on your phone, or your phone might have run out of battery, and there's absolutely no judgment on any of the reasons why you may not have a Bible with you. But if you do happen to not have a Bible with you and you'd like one, Matt is going to be available with some Bibles. And so while he does that, I would encourage you to do it, because we're tackling quite a big chunk today. We're tackling 5 chapters. I know. It's a lot, isn't it? But don't be dispirited. It's a lot. So Matt, in his little briefing notes to those of us who are going to preach on this, he said, you've got a big section, and you can either look to focus on 1 or 2 sort of particular elements of it, or you can just sort of give a bit of an overview. And this morning, my plan is to give a bit of an overview. And I'm helped in this by the fact that the first 4 of those 5 chapters, so that's chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7, basically tell one story. So it's one big story that plays out over the course of 4 chapters. And then the last chapter in scope for this morning, chapter 8, sort of tees up what's going to happen next week and what we're going to look at there. So my plan is not to read the whole thing. You'll probably be relieved to know. I'm going to sort of summarize what goes on and read pockets of it to you. And one of the reasons I wanted to make sure that you had access to a Bible is because normally we would have this passage on the screen, I'd read it, or whoever's preaching would read it from beginning to end, and we can all be pretty confident that I am talking about what's written in the Bible, and we can all sort of agree that together. This time around, you're going to have to take a little bit on trust, because I'm not going to be reading it word for word, and that's why I want you to have something that you can refer to, so you can check that what I'm saying is actually what's written, and you can do that little bit of checking for yourself. So we're going to look at 5 chapters, 3 mistakes, and 1 underlying problem. Okay? 5 chapters, 3 mistakes, 1 underlying problem. We're going to start in 1 Samuel and chapter 4. Okay? Now, in 1 Samuel and chapter 4, we're going to start. So the first sentence sort of belongs to the previous chapter. The word of Samuel came to all Israel. Sort of bracket that with what we were looking at before, and start with what in my Bible starts with now. Now they went out to battle against the Philistines. And so you've got the people of Israel, and they go out to battle, as we just read, against the Philistines. And they go out, and they are defeated. And this is something that happens occasionally in the history of the people of Israel. And they're defeated, and they gather together. And they come back, and verse 3, when the people came to the camp, so they returned after the battle, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." So they have a bright idea. They've been defeated, and they conclude that the thing to do to get victory next time is to bring the Ark of the Covenant among them, that it may give them victory. And so it's brought among them. And Eli's sons, who we heard about a couple of weeks ago, Hophni and Phinehas, they bring the Ark of the Covenant. And the Israelites are delighted, and they cheer and shout and say, "Well, now it's sealed now, boys. We are definitely winning this." And the Philistines hear the cheering and the shouting, and they go, "Goodness me. They've got the presence of verse 8, "Woe to us, who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague." So God's fame has spread. The Philistines are aware of what he's done in the past, and they are filled with fear at the prospect of him entering the Israelite camp. And so they say to one another, "Take courage and be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated. And they fled, every man to his home. This is verse 10. And there was a very great slaughter, and 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel fell. And the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. This is a bad day for the people of Israel. This is a bad day. They've been defeated twice in succession. They've lost the Ark of the Covenant. This tangible symbol of the presence of God has been lost now to the Philistines. And so a man runs, a Benjaminite runs. I'm a Benjaminite, I suppose, in a sense, in that my name is Benjamin, and I certainly couldn't run the 18 miles that this man ran from the battlefield to Shiloh, where he finds Eli, whose sight is failing and his health is failing generally, and he's sat by the road, and he's concerned. Yes, he's got a lot of skin in the game here. He's got Israel out in battle. His sons have gone with the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant has gone. And it says in, where are we? In verse 13, Eli sat by the road watching, for his heart trembled for the Ark of God. And the man comes from the battlefield, and he shares news, and it's bad news, obviously. And he goes and he shares it with the people, and he shares it with Eli, who says to him, "How did it go, my son?" And the messenger says, he who brought the news answered and said, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has been a great defeat among the people. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backwards from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. For the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel for 40 years. So that's the end of Eli. That's how it finishes. These so distressed by the news that comes back to him, yes, about his sons, but more than that, by the loss of the Ark of the Covenant, that he falls off his seat, and as we read previously, it sort of fattened himself on the choice pieces of meat. This is one of the problems that Matt unpacked for us a couple of weeks ago. So he's a big bloke, and he fell off his seat and broke his neck and died. But that's not the end of the death. This is like Shakespeare. This is like everybody dying at the end of Shakespeare, because then we go on and we discover about Phinehas' wife. So this is Eli's daughter-in-law, and she turns out to be pregnant. And they go and they break the news to her as well. And she dies in childbirth. She gives birth to her labour, comes on earlier than expected. I know a little bit about that. And she gives birth to a son, and she names him Ichabod. And Ichabod means, let me read it to you. She named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God has been captured, and because her father-in-law and her husband had died." And then she dies. So chapter 4 rounds off with the sort of, if you think of it like a bit of a movie, or it's a scene change here between 4 and 5, and we've dispatched some characters. We're moving on to a new phase. So Eli has died out of shock. His daughter-in-law has also died. The Philistines have lost, the Israelites, have lost 30,000 men in the field. They've lost the Ark of the Covenant. It's bad news. Scene change. Chapter 5. We're now in Philistia, I think that is how you pronounce it, and it is specifically in Ashdod, which is where they've taken the Ark of the Covenant. And chapter 5 reads like a bit of a comedy, actually. It's a little bit of light relief. You might not think that the Bible contains passages like this. But chapter 5 has the story of they take the Ark of the Covenant to Ashdod, and they put it in a temple with one of their gods called Dagon. And they put him in the temple there, and that's all great. No, that's fine. And they come back the next day, and they find that the statue of Dagon has fallen on his face before the Ark of the Covenant. And they think, this isn't right. So they put him back on his platform. And then they come back the next morning, and he's fallen again before the Ark of the Covenant. And not just that, but his head's come off, and his arms. And it's just his trunk that's left. And they think, I'll tell you what, this is not good. This is not going well for us. And more than that, it says in chapter 5 and verse 6, "The hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both in Ashdod and its territory. When the men of Ashdod saw how things were, they said, 'The ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is hard against us and against Dagon our God.'" So they sent it around the country to somewhere else. Initially, they send it off to Gath, and then this story effectively replays. The Ark of the Covenant goes to Gath, and they don't have much better luck either, and they send it around the country. And ultimately, in chapter 5 and verse 19, no, doesn't exist. Chapter 5 and verse 11, they conclude together, they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it return to its own place, that it may not kill us and our people. for there was a deathly panic through the whole city. The hand of God was very heavy there. So you've got this, they've taken the Ark of the Covenant, a great symbol of victory, but it does them no good at all. It brings sort of heavy affliction. And so they decide we must go, we must return it. But how do we return it in such a way as not to admit to the Israelites that their God's better than our God? How do we do that? Because that's what's happened. Their God is more powerful than our gods. But by giving him back, we sort of admit that. So how are we going to give him back in such a way as to not admit that? And they come up with a plan, and the plan is that they attach, they create a cart, and they put the Ark of the Covenant on it, together with some guilt offerings that sort of symbolize the afflictions that have been brought on them, the tumors and the mice, and they put this all together, and then they take 2 cows, and they just set them off. And they say, well, if they go off to Beth Shemesh, which is sort of the Israelite territory, then we can be pretty sure that, that God is sort of calling them back, and that's that. And if they go off another direction, well, then the tumors and the plagues, that was just coincidence. Fine. It's a good plan. It works. And so they send the cart off, and we read in chapter 6 and verse 12, the cows went straight in the direction of Beth Shemesh along one highway, lowing as they went. They turned neither to the right nor the left, and the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley, and when they lifted their eyes and saw the ark, they rejoiced to see it. The cart came into the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh and stopped there. A great stone was there. They split the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was beside it, in which were the golden figures, and set them upon the great stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrificed sacrifices on that day to the Lord. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned that day to Ekron. So they see it, they witnessed it. Well, this was our plan. If it goes in that direction, that tells us something. They see that it goes in that direction. They see the men of Israel sort of rejoice and offer sacrifices, and that's their confirmation that this really was God's hand who was heavy against them, and they return to their land. And you think, okay, great, that's the end of the story, isn't it? They've got the ark back, everything returns to peace and tranquility, but it doesn't. People of Beth Shemesh find that life is difficult for them as well. Chapter 6 and verse 19, he struck some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they looked upon the ark of the Lord. He struck 70 of them, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow. And so you see that this sort of lack of reverence, they're delighted to receive the ark back, but they treat it with a lack of reverence. If you're familiar with the earlier books in the Old Testament, you know that that's not a thing to do, that there are great instructions on how you approach the Ark of the Covenant, how it is to be sort of accommodated. And these people took it lightly, and they looked upon it, and as a result, the Lord struck them down. And so these people as well in Israel say, oh, we're not having this. We're not having it here. It brings trouble. And so they move it on. And it moves on again to a place called Kiriath Jearim. And that's where we leave it, in the beginning of chapter 7, where it says this. The men of Kiriath Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord and brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill. Then they consecrated his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of the Lord. From that day the ark was lodged at Kiriath Jearim. A long time passed, some 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. So now we get to a point where the ark has sort of reached a resting place, and a sort of a calm returns. And then we have another sort of a scene change, if you like, and Samuel re-enters. So he was our big sort of character in the early chapters of this book, and then he's just been off the scene while this plays out with the Ark of the Covenant, and then he returns in chapter 7, and at verse 3, and it says, and Samuel said to all the house of Israel, if you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. And they gathered together to do this, and the Philistines spy an opportunity to attack again. And we see in verse 7, now when the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard it, they were afraid of the Philistines. And the people of Israel said to Samuel, do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. And he does. And they go out, and there's a great rout and a great victory against the Philistines, who were subdued and in that particular part of territory, and a number of other sort of border towns are brought back, and there's And there's some stability and some peace. Chapter 7 and verse 14, the cities that the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron to Gath, and Israel delivered their territory from the hand of the Philistines. There was peace also between Israel and the Amorites. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. And that is the sort of that chunk. So you have an arc there. Arc as in with a C, story arc, about an ark with a K, Ark of the Covenant. So it gets taken into battle as like a lucky charm, effectively. We'll return to that thing. It's lost, it's returned, it's moved around, the people repent and turn to God, and then a peace returns to the land. And then the final chapter that we're looking at a little bit today, which tees up what we're going to look at next week, which is picking up, so Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. And chapter 8 begins in the same vein. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The names of the firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not work in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Does that remind you of anyone? Does that remind, the parallels are so stark, aren't they? Eli and his two sons who were worthless men, who didn't follow his ways, who took advantage of their position. Samuel and his two sons, who it turns out are also pretty worthless men, taking advantage of their position. And Samuel, like Eli, blinds to their faults and makes them judges anyway. This is how it's going to work. I'm going to die. My sons will take it on from me. But the elders of Israel don't fancy it. And they say in verse 4, then the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us, like all the nations. Now Samuel's not wildly pleased about this. He doesn't like that idea. And he takes it to God. And God says to him, well, listen to the people, but make sure they know what they're asking for. And so Samuel goes and he says, well, you need to know that if you're going to have a king, it's going to look like this, that, and the other. And he describes what's going to happen if they have a king. And the people turn around to him and say in verse 19, but the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. And they said, no, there shall be a king over us, that we shall be like all the nations. Then our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And while Samuel heard the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey their voice and make them a king. Samuel then said to the men of Israel, go every man to his city. And that's where we'll pick up next week. Now I said we're going to look at 5 chapters, 3 mistakes, and 1 underlying problem. And perhaps you've read the whole passage through in your own time. That's a whistle-stop sort of tour of it. But even maybe through what I shared, hopefully, 3 key things sort of stood out to me as 3 moments where the people made a mistake in their view of God. Okay, where the people approached him in a way that was inappropriate and suffered the consequences for it. The first is in chapter 4, where they bring the Ark of the Covenant to sort of win the battle. So they've lost that first battle. They say, you know what we need? They sort of ask quite a perfunctory question in verse 3. Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? They don't pause to actually reflect on the answer to that question. There's a similar sort of example that happens in Joshua chapter 7. And in Joshua chapter 7, there's also a defeat for the people. And Joshua, verse 6, tore his clothes and fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until the evening, he and the elders of Israel. And they put dust on their heads, and Joshua said, alas, O Lord God, why have you brought this people over the Jordan at all, to give us into the hands of the Amorites, to destroy us? Would it have been better content to dwell beyond the Jordan? O Lord, what can I say that Israel has turned their backs before their enemies? For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear of it, and will surround us and cut off our name from the earth. And what will you do for your great name? In that sense, they've been defeated, and he seems to come with a genuine humility and anxiety, and he asks the question of God, why have you done this? In here, it's kind of perfunctory. It's kind of, why has he done this? Well, never mind that. I'll tell you what the answer is, boys. We're going to bring the Ark of the Covenant. We're going to bend God to our will by bringing the symbolic presence with us, and it's like the hammer of Thor. It's like, we've got this, and now we're going to win. We have to win. We have to win. And your first mistake that's made there is to view God as a tool whereby we can use to get what we want. I think that's what stands out to me from that part of the passage. That God is, their view of him, they're not asking for his guidance. They're not seeking him for, are we on the right track? The fact that we've lost, does that tell us that we might be doing something wrong, that you might have a different plan for us, that we need to exhibit more dependency on you, or more humility, or that we need to seek you or prioritize you? No, it's none of that. It's why have we lost? Never mind why we've lost. Let's get the Ark of the Covenant. That'll do it, boys. Come on, let's do it. And you can even get it in the terminology that's used. If we go, let us bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord here among us from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies. I know I don't want to read too much into a translation thing, but it may come among us. The ark may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies. You contrast that with chapter 7, when they have this third skirmish with the Philistines, after they've had this moment of repentance, and they're before Samuel, and they say to him, do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. Do you see what I mean? In chapter 4, they're putting their faith in the thing. They're saying we can bend God to our will. We can use him like a tool. This thing will do it. This thing has power beyond the symbolism, and it will save us. And they learn the lesson, and by chapter 7, they're saying, no, he will save us. Let's look to him. So the first mistake, I think, that we see in this passage is the mistake of the people thinking that God can be used as a tool to get what they want. The second mistake, I think we see, is the experience of the Philistines when they capture the Ark of God. And that's a mistake of thinking that God will just sit alongside other gods perfectly happily. He's just one of a number. Add him to the shelf among your other gods, among your other priorities. So the Philistines bring the Ark of God, and they bring it to Ashdod, and they put it in the house of Dagon alongside their God. And I think that's fine. This is a place where gods live. So we'll put this God with that God. And what we see is that Yahweh, the Lord, won't stand for it. He doesn't sit alongside other gods. He doesn't wait. And it's very vividly shown. They wake up the next morning, and their inanimate God is on his face before the Ark of the Covenant. And that's the story, you might remember the story of the prophets of Baal. That's a good one. Not so much a Sunday morning story, perhaps. But that's where it's sort of, it's Elijah, isn't it? And they have a competition, a literal competition, where they get two altars, and they have prophets of Baal, and there's a test between gods. It's an amazing story. And it does a similar thing here where God doesn't mess about with other gods. He doesn't sort of play. He doesn't sit alongside one of a number. And yet this is the mistake that they've made, that it's just another object. It's just another symbol. It's just another sort of God to be worshipped, one of several. Last week, we had the great privilege and delight of dedicating our daughter. It was really great to be here. I know many of you were here, and you made cakes, and you gave us cards and presents, and we're so grateful for that. And it was really special. And before my daughter was born, at the point that sort of we discovered that we were pregnant, and that Becky was pregnant, that we were expecting, and I, from two sort of sources in my life, both my then boss and my father-in-law said with scarcely disguised glee, "Oh, your life's going to change. And in ways you don't understand, your life's going to change." Oh, okay, fine. And of course I knew they were right. But I didn't like they said, how can you know? How can you know? I didn't know. And then in sort of early September, this little 5-pound, 12-ounce bomb went off in my life, and everything else sort of thrown out of the way. And, sleep, whatever, spontaneity, yeah, I can kiss that goodbye. Sort of all of that stuff. And it's like, it's a silly little sort of analogy, but in a sense, like, she doesn't play second fiddle. She doesn't come in and sort of sit along the shelf and say, well, I like to do this, and I like to do that, and on Saturdays I like to do the other. Oh, and of course we have a baby as well. And that she fits in among our many other priorities, and we'll make time for no, blows the whole thing up. This is and everything else sort of sits now in a new set of priorities and a new way of thinking. And then it's a silly little example, but there's a sense in which, the Philistines thought that God's just another God. Just put him on the shelf alongside the other ones. And he said, no, I'm the God. I don't come in and fit into your pattern. I blow it up. I sit at the top. Nobody sits alongside or above me. So that's the second mistake. The third mistake I think we see is in chapter 8. So they've had this wonderful repentance moment, the people of Israel, and they've returned to God, and they've sort of declared their need for him, and they've expressed that in battle against the Philistines and their dependence on him, and they've won a great victory. And then sort of hard on the heels of that, peace has reigned, and things are good. And we get to chapter 8, and it's like, just have to kind of ruin it a bit, don't they? And they say to Samuel, we don't think, you're getting on a bit, and we don't think much of your sons. I'll tell you what will work. Again, no asking, no humility, no let's seek God for the way forward. I'll tell you what would work. Let's have a king, like all the other nations. That would be good, won't it? Yeah, that'll be good. That's what we need. A king like all the other nations. God says, you're my people. You're my treasured possession. I brought you out. I've chosen you, especially you. And they say, no, well, yeah, that's great. Yeah, that is great. But also, can we be like everybody else? Can we have a king? Can we have one to stand for us? Can we have one to judge us? Can we have one to fight our battles? Can we supplement you, God? You're great and everything, but maybe we can have like an insurance policy. Maybe we can have an earthly representative. Maybe we can have someone else to vest our hope and our expectation in other than you. How about that? Does that sound like a good idea? Of course it sounds like a very bad idea. Samuel knows that it's a bad idea. Let's give them ourselves a little bit of credit. It does sound like they're in a tricky situation. So there's no sort of established transfer of power in the place, and Samuel is getting old and his sons are useless. So you sort of understand that something different needs to happen. But for them just to say, well, let's make us like everybody else. It works for everybody else. I'll tell you what, let's do that. And there's a misunderstanding there that says God needs, in some way, supplementing. We need an insurance policy. He's not quite enough. I need to add something. I need to add something of my own sort of power and control, just in case he doesn't come through for us, just to sort of round it off. And I think underlying these three mistakes, I said there's 5 chapters, 3 mistakes, and 1 underlying problem. I think there's a lot else you could draw. It's a big chunk of scripture, isn't it? There's other points you could make, but those are just 3 mistakes that sort of stand out to me. And I think they point to one sort of underlying problem, which is a small view of God and a big view of ourselves. Or in this story, a small view of God and a big view of themselves, I suppose you'd say, in this context. In chapter 4, when they summon the Ark of the Covenant as a sort of a token, as just a tool, a weapon to be wielded, we've got a great idea here. We know what we're doing. We're going to win a victory. God will help us. He has to help us because we're going to bring the Ark of the Covenant. We'll force his hand. He's going to be on our side. I know what I'm doing. I'm the one making the decision here. And God can be sort of wheeled in as a tool, as an excuse, as a trump card. There you go. I'm going to hit you with this hammer. It makes them big and God small. You say, he's one of a number of objects of worship. You're saying, I'm going to decide what my priorities are. Thank you very much. These people of the Philistines in Ashdod. We've got a number of priorities, thank you. And I think you can just fit in as one of a number, God. Thank you very much. You sit in the sort of the pantheon of the gods. And God says, no. Get a big view of God. That's a big view of ourselves. It says, I can make that decision. I can decide. You can sit where I tell you to sit. No. I sit above, God says. That he needs supplementing, that in some way he's insufficient by himself. It's a big view of man and a small view of God that says, I can do something, I can plug a gap here, I can be extra, I can be what he needs. And in a sense, that big view of man and that small view of God is the enduring mistake of mankind, isn't it? Right from the very beginning, when we dedicated Lottie, you gave us a gift. You might not know that you gave us a gift, but you gave us a gift. You gave us a Jesus Storybook Bible, which is great. And we're reading it together. Well, I'm doing most of the reading. And we're sort of doing a story. And the other day, read the story of the Tower of Babel. Which is a great example of these people who said, I'll tell you what, we know what we're doing. We're going to build a tower. Let's show the world how great we are. This testament to our own ingenuity, our own magnificence. We can reach all the way to the heavens. It's a big view of man and it's a small view of God. right from the beginning. And you could say, I think, that it's the spirit of the age now that says, I'm really the centre of it. And insofar as I'll allow God in at all, I'll allow him in on my terms. I think that's probably a fair thing to say, isn't it, about sort of the culture that we live in? I mean, reading some of the reports this week, potentially a fair thing to say about parts of the established church. I'm not going to get into that. But there's something that says, I make the decisions here. I'm the centre of this, and God sort of fits in. It's a big view of man, and it's a small view of God, and it's the complete opposite of the gospel, which says, God's the big bit, and you're the small bit. The gospel that says, he's not a tool with which we can accomplish our purposes. No, it's the opposite. We're tools with which he accomplishes his purposes. That he's not one of many priorities competing in my life. No, he's the priority. He's supreme. Jesus will bring all things together under his feet, reign forever. He's not one of a number. He doesn't need extra help from me. He's sufficient. His sacrifice is enough. There's nothing I can add to it. So if these three mistakes point to one sort of underlying problem, which is still true now for us in many ways, still something that we struggle with, I would say even in the sort of the hearts of each of us, even post becoming Christians, it's still something that can eat away. I guess just in the last couple of minutes, the question I would ask is there anything in here about how we address that, how we get a bigger view of God? If the problem is that we have a big view of ourselves and a small view of God, is there anything in the passage that might help us in that? And I think there is, you'd be surprised to know. I think there is. I think there's two things that I would say about that. I think it's taught and it's experienced. A big view of God is taught and experienced. And what I mean by that is it's taught in that we get a big vision of God from what he says about himself in his word. And in that sense, the way to do that, the way to address a worldview, a sort of a swerve to rot that has us as the centre of the story, is to get to know him better and to read these stories and understand more about him. So there's something about it being taught. There's also something, I think, about it being experienced. There's something about giving him space to be a big God. In chapter 7, when Samuel is talking to the people and he's bringing them to repentance, and he says, if you're returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroths from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. There's something about doing away with all the clutter and all the competing factions and giving God the space to be big at that point. And they say to the Israelites, do away with all the other gods. Look to him only to deliver you. Sure enough, the Philistines pose a threat. The people of Israel do just that. They say, Samuel, don't stop praying for us, that he might deliver us. And they win a mighty victory and an enduring victory that goes on for some time. So there's something about experiencing it by giving God space to be big and by testifying to it. We didn't really pause on it, but in chapter 7 and verse 12, Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen and called its name Ebenezer. For he said, till now, the Lord has helped us. We've had a little bit of that this morning as well, haven't we? There's something about in correcting our view that puts us at the centre and makes God small. Something about making him big and putting us in our right place is about learning it from what's taught, about experiencing it in terms of giving him the opportunity to be big in our lives, and then testifying to it for ourselves and for those around us, recognising this far has the Lord helped us. That, with hindsight, I don't know if this is true for you, it's true for me. With hindsight, you can look back on situations that at the time you felt utterly dependent on God, and you say, actually, well, it was always going to play out fine, wasn't it? And actually, I made some really good decisions in there. I made some really good... So in fact, the fact that it went really well actually almost says more about me than anything else. It was good, and you can sort of lose sight of the fact that the one who brought you through was one who promises to bring you through. And there's something about setting up an Ebenezer in these moments and saying, this far as the Lord brought us. I'm not going to allow myself to get a big view of myself and a small view of him, because I'm going to keep reminding myself of what he's done and what I've done. We're at time. I want to sing together again, Alice is going to come and lead us. But I found that a challenge and an encouragement. 3 mistakes, 1 underlying problem, a fix in the gospel, and some practical stuff that we can do to ensure for ourselves that we have a big view of God, a small view of ourselves. Because, friends, that's where it's going. That's where we all end up, with a big view of God and a small view of ourselves. We know that. That's the eternal sort of destination. Every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. That's where we end up, with a big view of him and a small view of ourselves. How much better to get there willingly along the way than be brought kicking and streaming to that place on that day. So let's do that work among us individually, encourage one another, and be built up by it and glorify him through it. Alice.